dear presidents and representatives of club.da, of the Rotary Club Maria Theresia, of students advocating gender equality, distinguished speakers, dear students, dear guests. My name is Giulia Pelillo. I'm the head of the research area Cultural Studies here at the Diplomatic Academy, and on behalf of the Diplomatische Akademie Wien, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event on balancing the scales, rights, justice, action for all women and girls. This event, jointly organized by our alumni association club.da, the Rotary Club Maria Theresia, and our committed students, takes place on the occasion of the International Women's Day 2026. It is both a celebration and a call to reflection. I'm truly delighted to see many of you here, and I must say I'm particularly delighted to see many men here in the audience who have come to listen, to engage, and to participate in an important discussion about rights, justice, and action. Rights, justice. These are words we have long considered pillars of democracy and of international order, the compass that should guide political action. And yet, today, these terms seem to be losing their hegemony in the geopolitical vocabulary, and, even more worryingly, in political practice. In this disorienting climate of polycrisis, ecological, democratic, geopolitical crisis, we are frequently confronted with statements such as, "There is no alternative. We have no other choice." Often, these statements are pronounced by powerful leaders and very often by powerful men, surrounded by other men. What I often wonder is this: were women consulted? And if they were consulted, were they truly listened to? Were other perspectives incorporated, other ways of addressing problems considered? Or are we, women and men alike, still following a script written centuries ago according to patriarchal norms and expectations? Here I would like to emphasize something that should be considered as a key element of any democratic education: the intellectual practice of listening. Listening not as a polite pause before speaking, but as a genuine readiness to be transformed by what we hear. Empirical studies consistently show that women are interrupted more frequently than men in professional and academic settings, as well as in everyday conversations. And they remain significantly underrepresented in leadership positions. But even when women reach leadership roles, the question remains, are they truly listened to? At the same time, we witness political developments in various parts of the world where women's rights are being curtailed rather than strengthened. This is not the kind of gender equality women have struggled for over generations. So when I teach our introductory course in cultural studies here at the DA and introduce students to gender studies, I often assign Bell Hooks' book, "Feminism is for Everybody." I do so to underline a simple but powerful message: feminism is not a project for women alone, nor is gender equality something that disadvantages men. It is a project for society as a whole. It is about creating structures in which everyone can flourish. In this spirit, I warmly welcome all women and men in this room. It is simply not true that there is no alternative. It is not true that we cannot act. Perhaps we cannot individually end worse or solve the ecological crisis overnight. But we can do something very concrete. We can ensure that women's perspectives gain visibility. We can cultivate the discipline of listening, and we can translate listening into practice. Because gender equality is not about adding female names to existing structures and then continuing as usual. It is about doing things differently. It is about allowing different perspectives, different forms of knowledge, different kinds of creativity and genius to shape decisions. Listening is therefore not passive. It is political, it is transformative. Listening is action. If we truly listen and if we allow what we hear to reshape our institutions, our policies, and our everyday practices, then we are already balancing the scales. With this in mind, I wish us all an evening of attentive listening and inspiring exchange. Thank you and welcome to the Diplomatische Akademie Wien.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brigitta Blaha, the Vice President of club.da, and I'm very happy to be here to observe International Women's Day. If we can celebrate, we will see after tonight's discussions. I would like to thank my colleagues from the Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia for the continued good cooperation in organizing this event. We have been doing it for 4 years now. To all who are not yet familiar with club.da, I would like to recall that it's one of the oldest alumni clubs in Austria. It was founded in 1969 by graduates from the first course with the aim to keep alumni in touch with each other and also with the current student body and with faculty and staff from DA. After completion of their studies, and the slogan that was coined at that time was "Your home after graduation." Over 60% of the alumni have now joined the club, and we are at over 2,000 members from over 100 countries, and we have 13 local chapters. Apart from networking through our career platform, DA Connect, and a broad range of in-person and virtual events, the club supports current students. It offers career services. Next year, there will be another DA link. Scholarships. We have given 60 scholarships to students from 31 different countries since 2011, and a mentoring program, which we do also together with the Rotary Club. club.da also supports students' initiatives like DASICON that took place last week, the students' magazine Polemics, and the annual charity ball, which will be on the 11th of April this year, and you are all cordially invited. International Women's Day has been celebrated for over 100 years, and many rights have been achieved during this period. Rights, however, mean nothing if they cannot be defended. International Women's Day 2026 comes at a time when justice systems are under strain. Conflict, repression, and political tensions are weakening the rule of law. The World Bank notes in a study that women and girls have only 64% of the legal rights of men. When justice fails, women often pay the price. In nearly 70% of surveyed countries, and I quote from ECOSOC documents, women face more barriers accessing justice than men. For the 676 million women and girls living within 50 kilometers of active conflict zones, justice systems are largely absent and perpetrators act with impunity. Without justice, rights are just words. With justice, rights become power. We will talk about all this tonight, and I would like now to invite the president of the Rotary Club to say a few words.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear distinguished guests. My name is Arndt Röchling. I'm the president of Rotary Vienna Maria Theresia in this Rotarian year. And it is really an honor to be here tonight and to open together this important event for us. 2-3 sentences about our club. We are one of the international clubs here in Vienna. We are a very diversified club, I have to say, and we are proud about this. We have more than 50%, as far as I see today, are female members of clubs. That is for Rotary, I would say, a big exception, yeah, I have to say. So we have here in Rotary, also in this organization, still a lot of room for improvement in that regard. Yeah, but Vienna Maria Theresia here is really an example for a good diversification. For Rotary, the topic of tonight's discussions goes to the very heart of our values. It's about dignity, fairness, and equal opportunity. A society can only truly prosper when women and girls have the same rights, the same voice, and the same chances to succeed. And as a father of 3 daughters, yeah, this is not an abstract issue for me. Like many parents, we want our children to grow up in a world where their opportunities are defined by their talents and their dedication. And this also concerns the economic world, I have to say, as a business leader. Businesses that take equality seriously, including fair and equal pay, yeah, are not only doing the right thing, they are also building stronger and more innovative organizations. So tonight's event, organized together with club.da and with the students advocating gender equality SAGE, reminds us that progress requires more than words. And this is, I think, also the right motto of tonight's event. It requires awareness, in my view, rights, justice, and action. So thank you very much for being here, and we are looking forward to have a great panel discussion under the leadership of Vera Budway from our club. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, distinguished guests, panelists, and fellow students. Thank you for joining us tonight at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna for this year's International Women's Day panel, which has become a cherished annual tradition. I'm Klara Brunnsteiner, and I'm honored to speak this evening as president on behalf of our student organization, Students Advocating for Gender Equality. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to the Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia and club.da for their outstanding work in organizing this year's panel. I very much look forward to hearing from our distinguished panelists. We gather at a pivotal moment in the lead up to International Women's Day 2026. At the current pace, the world will leave 351 million women and girls living in extreme poverty by 2030. Furthermore, the global gender gap still stands at roughly 1/3 of equality yet to be achieved. At the same time, women hold just 27.2% of seats in national parliaments worldwide, highlighting the persistent underrepresentation of women in political leadership. This year's theme, Balancing the Scales, Rights, Justice, Action, reminds us that access to rights alone is not enough. Those rights must be upheld through fair justice systems and sustained by responsible action by all of us everywhere. Today we will talk about justice. Justice for women and girls extends far beyond legal texts. Around the world, women and girls continue to face disproportionate repression, from restrictions on mobility and education to laws that allow disproportionately lenient penalties for violence against women in certain contexts. These realities underscore the urgency of tonight's theme. Legal equality must be matched by effective enforcement and meaningful cultural transformation. As students, scholars, and advocates committed to gender equality, we have an important role to play in moving beyond rhetoric toward concrete action, both within our own institutions and in the broader world. History has shown us that rights codified without justice are hollow, and that justice without action remains stagnant. I'm excited to see all of you here today and grateful to our distinguished panelists whose insight will deepen our understandings of these challenges and perhaps illuminate pathways forward. Thank you, and I look forward to a stimulating and inspiring discussion.
Yes, a piece of information. You may have noticed that Corinna Milborn is not here. Unfortunately, she is sick and couldn't make it. And we're very happy and grateful to Vera Budway that she will take over this job for tonight. Vera is not only a member of Rotary, as you have heard before, but she's Senior Economic Officer and Head of the Economic Governance Unit at OSCE. She joined this organization in 2019 as a Senior Coordinating Advisor for Gender Equality, a role she served until 2023. She has over 25 years of international public and private sector experience in economic cooperation and development, diversity management, and program and project management. Prior to joining the OSCE, Vera spent 12 years as Chief Diversity Officer at the Austrian Erste Group Bank. She began her career in international affairs at the Southeast European Cooperative Initiative and the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe in Vienna and in Brussels. She's a US citizen, and she received her master's degree in political science and international relations from Georgetown University. Thank you very much, Vera, and she will introduce the panelists to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you all for being here. I'll invite the panelists to come up. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this International Women's Day discussion, Balancing the Scales, Rights, Justice, Action for All Women and Girls. The title is ambitious because the truth is the scales are not balanced, not in diplomacy, not in migration systems, not in peace processes, not in STEM institutions, and not in leadership cultures, and certainly not for all women and girls. Over the past decade, we have built really impressive architecture of rights, international conventions, national action plans, gender strategies, institutional commitments. On paper, progress is undeniable, and yet implementation lags. Representation does not always translate to power. Protection does not always guarantee justice, and commitments do not automatically produce change. And at the same time, we are operating in a climate of great backlash. Hard-won gains are being questioned. Gender equality is sometimes framed as optional, ideological, or secondary to more urgent matters. But equality is not a side issue. It is a stability issue. It is a security issue, a governance issue, and fundamentally a justice issue. So today we're going to discuss where are the gaps between rights and reality, what is still missing, and what concrete actions can we take at the institutional, political, and personal levels. So all women and girls requires us to think intersectionally, out of the box. And our panel brings together perspectives from migration governance, diplomacy, peace and security, policy, international technical institutions, and organizational transformation. Joining me today to discuss is, first of all, I'd like to welcome Marian Benbow Pfisterer. She's Chief of Mission at the International Organization of Migration, Country Office, Austria. Welcome. Then I'm delighted to welcome Christine Brandauer. She's focal point for women, peace, and security at the Austrian Federal Ministry for European and International Affairs. Jeremy Francis, actually a former colleague from the OSCE, but now Associate Diversity Officer at CTBTO and Gender Focal Point for Interagency Collaboration. And Sharon Ehrlich, who is a change management consultant and founder and CEO of Living While Learning. As you might have noticed from the agenda, we had also hoped to welcome Ambassador Milita Župevc to the panel, permanent representative of the Republic of Slovenia, to the UN and OSCE and other international organizations. Unfortunately, Ambassador Župevc has to be at the IAEA Board of Governors meeting, so she sends her apologies and cannot join us. So let's get started. I'm going to start by asking 2 rounds of questions to our panelists. Then I'll open the floor for your questions, and then we'll wrap up with some final statements. So, Marian, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to know if you can ask Migrant women and girls often experience layered vulnerabilities. Where do migration systems unintentionally reproduce gender inequality instead of correcting it?
Thanks, Vera, and just to say thank you very much for the invitation, and it's really a pleasure to be here in an event honouring International Women's Day. Before I answer your question, I think I want to step back a moment and make two remarks, and I think others have talked about words as well. I'd also quickly want to remark on narratives, because words shape realities. And how we speak about migrants and how we speak about women matters. And so it's important to me to make this point that we shouldn't look at migrant women primarily or exclusively from a perspective of vulnerability. Migration is a phenomenon that can create positive outcomes and contribute to women's empowerment. It can open up opportunities for women. It can also provide protection to women, such as women who at home are persecuted or escape situations of gender-based violence. So vulnerability is a topic in there, of course, but let's not frame migration and women through that perspective. Because otherwise we're sort of very similar to another narrative in discourse about migration, which sees migration as a problem rather than simply as a reality, as something that is and always will happen, and in many cases solution to an individual life story or a broader systemic issue. Second remark, and I'm sorry for being a bit long, but it's important, migrants are highly heterogeneous, of course. We see women and girls on the move who exhibit a diversity of experiences. Intersectionality is a really important point, and I wanted to make that. But also multiple factors, including gender identity, sexual orientation, migration status, age, but also socioeconomic status, can make a really big difference on migration situations, migration outcomes, migration trajectories. And when we think and talk about migration and gender, we often envisage a disadvantaged woman who's a migrant. We don't think about the female diplomat who is also a migrant, or the lady sitting at the cash registry who is helping us to actually remain fed, which is really important. So I want to bring that perspective into the discussion because I think it's important. Reality is complex. We need to take that into account and make sure that we avoid inadvertently promoting generalized or even stereotyped ideas about migrant women or women in general. And now to your question. To understand where and also importantly why migration systems produce inequalities, we need to look at the migration cycle. And we need to look at different types of migration, such as labor migration, asylum or family reunification, only to name 3 of them. At each stage of the migration cycle, we see different issues and gender dynamics at play. So if we look at the pre-departure or at the entry phase, at the phase of stay, at the return phase, or at a repeat cycle of migration, we have different dynamics and issues. At all of these stages, gender equality could inadvertently be reproduced. That's a fact. And then maybe just to look at labour mobility very briefly. First of all, labour markets are segmented according to gender. And so women are more concentrated in some sectors of the economy than others. And this segmentation changes across different regions, of course, which is interesting that we have to take into account in migration. Admission schemes in the global north are designed to attract skilled migrant workers, and they very often focus on production, on areas where women are less represented than men, such as ICT, engineering and finance, and fortunately that's changing, but very, very slowly. And then salary thresholds play a really important part in admission procedures for work permits. Women very often work in sectors that are less well paid, or in the same sector they still will have a different pay than men, a lower one. And so these circumstances, which have a reflection on migration policy, can lead to barriers that are not intended but are still there. And I could go on, but maybe I'll just hand hand the floor back.
Thank you so much. I think you really scratched upon a lot of really important points that we could have a panel just focused on that. I just want to touch upon something you said at the very beginning about narratives around migration, and one thing that struck to me too is how do we define a migrant versus an expat? I know in Austria there's this term Migrationshintergrund, but what is that? You know, is it I'm from the United States, but I work here and I live here. Am I a migrant? Am I an expat? I think that's a very interesting discussion that I think deserves further exploration, but thank you for raising that very important point. Let me move on to you, Christine. Now moving on more to the women in security, because you are covering the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, WPS. This agenda now is over 25 years old. Last year was the 25th anniversary of the WPS agenda. In your opinion, where are we still falling short in translating WPS commitments into real power shifts for women in conflict and post-conflict contexts? And how does this link to access to justice?
Thank you very much, Vera, for the question, and also thank you very much. It's an honor to be here on this panel tonight on the occasion of the International Women's Day. Well, I do think we fall short. Despite some gains, we still fall short in all 4 pillars of the WPS agenda. It's the prevention, it's the protection, it's the relief and recovery, and it's the participation. When I prepared the answer to that question, I didn't want to start with some numbers and facts because they are very abstract and we can have difficulties relating to individual destinies. But still, I would like to point out a few of them, taking them from last year's report on WPS from the UN Secretary General and also on conflict-related sexual violence. In the period of 2023 to 2024, the number of killed women and children in conflict quadrupled compared to 2021 to 2022. According to the UN, last year we had 4,600 registered cases of conflict-related sexual violence. 22% of the victims were women and girls. There might be a dark number we do not know about, and it would be much higher. In 2024, we also have a number of female negotiators, which is 7%, and 14% of mediators taking part in negotiations. And when we talk about the military and the political participation and representation, we are at 10% of female uniformed UN personnel. And I think this was already mentioned at the very beginning, we have around 25% of parliamentary seats that are occupied by women and around 29 countries that are led by women. So the numbers are pretty low. Today I would like to link WPS and today's topic, access to justice, because I think this is very much linked. Access to justice is very often shaped by structural inequalities, the discrimination, cultural norm, and of course the socio-economic situation. And I would like to highlight 4 points on that. The first one is legal barriers. Legal barriers can manifest itself by the lack, the complete absence of laws that somehow respond to women's needs, or simply that laws are outdated and do not reflect the reality women live in. What also comes on top of it are biases that still exist in law enforcement agencies, in justice institutions, with judges, with barristers, with court staff. And I think when I mention the term secondary victimization or victim blaming, I think we all know what we talk about. This is already an obstacle for women to put forward a complaint. The second one is the financial barriers. As Marian already mentioned, it depends very much on the socio-economic situation, and low-income women or women without access to financial means are disproportionately affected to afford legal services, and legal representation costs money. what we also see here when it comes to financial barriers is that there is a correlation between low income and a higher level of violence against women, meaning domestic violence, and in particular, violence, intimate partner violence. And also, I think this deserves mentioning here, the WHO mentioned violence against women as a major public health problem. But this is also a topic for a complete different panel, I think. The third point, it's a cultural and social barrier. We talk about shaming, we talk about stigmatization of women, or women being expelled from families and communities because they put forward a complaint against their husbands, their fathers, their intimate partner. So this is another barrier for women, that what limits them in their choice whether to come forward with a complaint. This is very often rooted in religion, but it's also very visible in traditional and conservative societies. And last but not least, it's the role of geography. Women who live in rural areas are also disproportionately affected, because traveling to the next court, traveling to the next institution that would provide legal aid or legal advice can be costly, but not only costly, it's also the travel. Are women safe to travel there alone? And what does it take to take this step? So I personally think the full implementation of the commitments of the WPS agenda needs to be worked on different fronts in a wider context and in the respect of the core human rights. And today, unfortunately, and even more since last week, we see that these are times of war. Negotiations are happening exclusively and behind closed doors. Participation of women and also participation of underrepresented groups is very low. And women need to participate. It's essential. From the ceasefire to the armistice and to the comprehensive peace agreement from day one. So I would like to close now because it's anyway too long. I think access to justice, gender equality, and security are very much interlinked.
Maybe just a brief follow-up, very briefly. Do you see right now political will to implement the WPS agenda?
I think it was already mentioned before. It's, this would have been actually a part of another question, of my answer to another question, but I think we can already mention it here. What I think is important is women, peace and security should not be a standalone pillar. It's very easy to push away a standalone pillar and say it's not needed now, we don't have time, we don't have the financial means, and we see it in the financing of women's organizations, we see it in the financing and protection of women human rights defenders. So there must be a political will in order to allocate funds to the right places. At the moment, it's a little bit modest, I would say, but there are still countries who are trying to push forward the agenda, and currently there are 113 national action plans on women, peace and security in place. So it is a number of countries who sign up to the commitments. There might be shortcomings in the implementation because it's more difficult, but there is a basic commitment we could possibly build upon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Moving to you, Jeremy. Working at CTBTO in organizations, what we call, maybe more technical international organizations like CTBTO, how do we move beyond the discussion around representation of women to genuine inclusion and influence? And can you give some examples maybe from your work and how you observe this in your at CTBTO?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here to pre-commemorate International Women's Day for 2026. So yeah, I've been privileged to have been at several different organizations in my relatively short career. And what I would say, first of all, is really don't get caught up on the numbers. for a few years, international organizations have been all about achieving gender parity. It was parity. It's like, we want more women, we need more women, and then we get the women, and then it's like, okay, what do we do with them? So then we have really like to ask these questions like, are they happy to come to work? Are they motivated? Do they even feel respected or safe in the workplace? So really ask ourselves, you know, when they come into our organizations, what are we really doing for them, and are they actually also benefiting from our programs? So from my work at the CTBTO, I unfortunately am the one asking these tough questions, not only of myself, but of my senior management. My director's here in the room with me, so she's telling me, please be careful with your emails. And yeah, so it doesn't always do me favors, but I'm up for a challenge. And you know, also coming from the OSC where I met Vera, security is something that has always been one of my focus in my portfolios as a policy officer. And one of the first questions I asked when I arrived to the CTBTO in 2024, late 2024, was how safe is our organization for women? And the response I got was, we have an administrative directive that addresses prohibited conduct, which includes sexual harassment. Okay, we have a piece of paper. Very good. So I rolled up my sleeves and I got to work. And in 2025, I can say that the CTBTO introduced and implemented pre-employment screening questions regarding misconduct, including sexual harassment and preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. We implemented for the first time the Code of Conduct to prevent harassment, including sexual harassment at UN system events. And this was done at our biggest event, which is our biannual Science and Technology Conference. So that was for the first time. We also submitted our first Protection Against Sexual Exploitation and Abuse Action Plan to the Office of the Special Coordinator on improving the UN response to sexual exploitation. We also updated our general conditions for contracts, which is our agreement that we have with third parties, so that when we strengthened the sexual harassment provisions that were already there, and for the first time we put in provisions to protect against sexual exploitation and abuse, to ensure that we don't engage with any third parties that are involved in such activities. And actually, one of the most fun things I had to do was I successfully held our first campaign for the 16 Days of Activism. So the orange tie is not for nothing. And yeah, I think that's really what I have been doing so far.
No, that's great. And like you said at the beginning, and this is really important, we shouldn't get caught on the numbers. This is far more than just filling a quota. And I know there are a lot of discussions about quotas, and it's one thing to have these targets, but then it's the organizational culture that's really important, because once you get the women, then you want to retain them. And that's why building an enabling culture is so important. So it's congratulations. It seems like you've done a lot in the short period of time, and now it's going to be interesting. That would be a follow-up question I'll ask in the second round. How do you measure that? But
sure.
Let's move to Sharon now, because I think some of what you said at the beginning about getting stuck with the numbers discussion, we see also in many organizations, also in the private sector. So you work very closely with leaders in navigating institutional change. And where do you see is the greatest disconnect between the stated gender equality commitments, what we see on paper, as Jeremy said, the nice pieces of paper, and everyday organizational culture?
Well, I could really say a lot there, and I'm going to immediately pick up on what Jeremy was talking about, getting hung up on the numbers. Because what I see very often in organization is that the measurement stops at the numbers and not at influence. So it's one thing to hire 50% women, but if those women don't hold budgets, they aren't involved in making strategic decisions, they don't have a seat at the table, then this is all performative. So this is something that I still see very often. And I have to preface this by saying I work across all industries. So it's not that one industry is better than the other. I see it everywhere. The other thing that is worth mentioning is that the language towards equality is very, very strong, but the action is very, very limp. And so what I examine and what I see and what I try to work with organizations is trying to change that, because the daily behavior is not reflecting the statements. And so what we see and what I understand is that decisions about who's getting promoted, who's getting stretch assignments, who is going abroad on this very, very sexy job for the next 2 years, those are still back office conversations, right? And if that's happening, this means that there is a break between what the commitment is on paper and what the reality is of the situation. The other thing that we see in cultures is that organizations still perpetuate this myth that if you work hard, you will get rewarded. And this is BS. We all understand it. And if you don't know what BS is, please ask your neighbor, because they can probably tell you. Because here's the thing. Women are taskmasters, right? You know, many of us have been raised to be test takers and to get things done. Then some of us make decisions to have families. Some of us have responsibility for taking care of our elderly parents. So we have a lot of balls up in the air, and we just get things done. But being a taskmaster does not translate well when you're talking about business impact, right? And so when I talk about that I did this, and I did that, and I did that, this falls on deaf ears. And this is, we are not trained to talk about the activities that we do in terms of impact. And so when Jeremy was talking about, you know, preparation, the training and the preparation for female leaders has to be a little bit different, because these systems were not built with us in mind. And if they weren't built with us in mind, this means that there has to be another way that it's approached. And I can go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop right there.
No, I mean, really important points that you raised, especially when it comes to visibility. I think that's the challenge most of us women face. We think if we work really hard and do a good job, somebody's going to notice us, and they're going to promote us, and they're just going to give us a raise. It's not going to happen. We have to be visible, and we have to talk and be able to sell the results of our work.
Right. And the other part of that is that having a strategic network, a high impact network, is everything. Yeah. It really is. And I know a lot of us think that networking is unsavory and it feels like we're taking things from people, but you don't have to frame it in that way. Networking is building relationships. Nobody will promote you. Nobody will give you the next assignment if they don't know, like, and trust you. And if those things don't happen, you're not going anywhere. So how do you get people to know, like, and trust you? You need to have a network within your organization and also in the industry. Because if your organization decides that they don't like you anymore or you don't like it, you need a network outside of there so you can find your next job.
Yeah. Another excellent topic, I think, for another panel is strategic networking for women. Now, I think the next round of questions is going to look at what can we actually do to rebalance these scales? And I'm going to now start with you again, Sharon. We're going to go back. You mentioned a few very important things. So let's, you know, in your work with senior leaders, what can they do more to maintain the momentum for gender equality when we are facing this backlash and fatigue? And what can women leaders do more to promote other women? Because I think we always have this discussion about women need to promote other women, and we still don't see that happening that much. But what is your experience with that?
Well, I mean, for the first part of the question, I think it's important to get away from this framing of gender equality as a diversity initiative. This is not a diversity initiative. This is a leadership imperative. And it was already stated by one of the speakers at the podium that when there is diversity, organizations perform better, right? And we're not just talking about gender diversity. We're talking about diversity from all underrepresented identity groups, right? And so the moment that you start to talk about diversity in women, people don't want to listen to it, especially now in this climate. This is not a popular topic, right? But if you talk about it as a strategic imperative, it lands differently because it is different. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing is that, you know, I cannot impress enough about visibility and moving from, you know, this talk about actions and talking about impact, right? And really being able to demonstrate that and to look at the numbers. When I'm coaching women, one of the things that first thing I'm asking them to do is to create a strategic brag bank. And it sounds ridiculous, that's my own branding, but effectively what I'm asking them to do is to take an inventory of every single thing that they've done, but frame it in terms of impact. Because what happens is you can create that 10-second elevator pitch when people ask you what you do. You don't say, well, I organize teams, I organize meetings, right? You say, I do this because that leads to that, right? And then you have the longer discussion, the longer narrative, that's 5 minutes. Then you have the same version for the performance evaluation that you're going to have at the end of the calendar in the fiscal year, right? So we have to learn how to talk about that. And there are lots of things that we can control. The system wasn't baked for us, but on the other hand, there are lots of things that we can change ourselves instead of lamenting about how crappy it is. The other thing I'd like to say is when it comes to women supporting women. Unfortunately, it breaks my heart to say this, but when women climb the food chain, sometimes they get very nasty because they have a lot of scars and they have a lot of war wounds, and they just somehow feel like, boy, I really had to make it happen to get up here, and I think everybody needs to have the same pain and the same misery. And it's not like that. Because when one of us rises, we should bring everybody else up with us. And so one of the things that I think is absolutely essential is that we start to create a normal behavior about talking and amplifying the voices of all women. So at all levels of the organization.
That is, you hit the nail on the head there. And I really do believe that we pay so much lip service to women supporting other women, but we need to do that. We need to amplify voices. One of my favorite quotes from Madeleine Albright, maybe some of you know, she said, there's a special place in hell for women that don't support other women. Yeah. She famously said that, and that's one of my favorite quotes, and I think we need to keep that in mind. But thank you for those tips, especially when it comes to thinking about impact and kind of reframing how we present what we do in terms of how has it impacted the work we do. Jeremy, now moving on to you. You kind of mentioned in the previous round a lot of great initiatives that you've implemented at CTBTO. But what metrics do you use to track that the diversity efforts or the efforts you do have translated into actual career advancement and equity for women, and maybe not just women, but what kind of diversity metrics? How do you measure success?
Okay. Well, there are several metrics that can be used. I think in the interest of time, I'll only touch on 3 of them. So representation and workforce composition by level, and that's something Sharon also just touched on. I can tell you from my own personal experience that, I am actually used to being one of the few black people around the building in general. Let alone when, say, I had my temporary promotion and I was acting chief of the HR policy unit at the OSCE. and being involved at even higher level meetings, then I was the only one. Actually, for this panel, I thought it was going to be the only one again, but then Sharon stole my thunder. So, but yeah, so, you know, because with diversity efforts, what they can do is they can typically stagnate at the lower levels. And then, you know, when you may see a higher number of women, for example, at higher levels, that's or minorities, that's a kind of an indication that something's going right. So what I would say is that, you know, for example, at the CTBTO, we have a number of women in key strategic roles. So like in the Office of the Executive Secretary, the senior advisor to the executive secretary is a woman, the chief of cabinet is a woman, one of the directors in our 3 key technical divisions is a woman, even our chief of quality management is a woman. So when you have all these women in these influential and strategic roles, then that's usually a good indicator of the success at your organization. And even now we're still endeavoring to get more women in the P3 to P5 roles, which are like middle management, because currently we're also overrepresented of women at the P2 level, which is the junior level. But then, like I said, when you can see the representation throughout and upwards, then that overrepresentation, we just kind of look at it as hopefully you are the future of our organization or the future elsewhere within another organization. The other metric I want to touch on is leadership access and decision power. So how influential are the women in your institutions? I already mentioned at the CTBTO we have several women in key strategic leadership roles, but you know, beyond those roles, you know, leadership is not linked to a job function. So, for example, at CTBTO, the president of the staff council is a woman. She's a conference assistant. In our organizational hierarchy, she's not that high up. But you would be sorely mistaken to underestimate her level of influence around the organization. And we also have a friend of mine, Valerie. She's a finance assistant, and she is heavily involved in our UN Disability and Inclusion Network at the VIC. So she is actually doing a lot of great work in embedding disability inclusion across the UN organizations at the Vienna International Center. And again, you know, she's not high up in the hierarchy, but she's having that impact. So, you know, by looking at the percentage of women who are on these types of, you know, committees and working groups, etc., that's another good indicator that your institution is doing well. And the third one I also want to touch on is the strength of your talent pipeline. So, you know, Sharon was also talking about, you know, preparation. And what I want to ask is, you know, are you taking the initiative to cultivate the next generation of people who are going to contribute to, you know, the work of your organization? And, you know, this can be done through like internships, job shadowing, and mentorship. So at the CTBTO, I have the privilege of coordinating the CTBTO mentoring program. And it's for early career women in STEM, nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. And, you know, the program is designed to just be a unique and practical development opportunity, to provide women with unique and practical development opportunities who are in fields where they remain underrepresented, so that they can become competitive in these areas. So it's, again, what Sharon was talking about, you know, that preparation. So, you know, this is not only to advance, you know, gender or career equity, but it's to just build that stronger pipeline of qualified people, not only worldwide, but also for the CTBTO. And last year, we were fortunate in that we were able to hire 2 former mentees as interns at the CTBTO for the first time. And right now we're hoping to see more of our former mentees join the organizations, but not only as interns, but especially in the professional and higher categories.
Great. Well, thank you for those examples. I do have a follow-up question about the role that men can play in changing the organizational culture. At CTBTO, how do you have a men engaged network, or how do you convince your male colleagues that they have a instrumental role to play in promoting gender equality?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned about the Men Engaged Network, because I was part of the Men Engaged Network at the OSCE, and one of, I would say, the priorities that I discussed with the Executive Secretary this year was starting an informal group of men for gender equality, and my idea was to have it comprise of the men that are actually already engaged in that activity, so the men who are mentors in the mentoring program, the men who are part of my prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse working group, the men who are part of the gender focal point networks that I built up across all the divisions, so that we can show that there are people who take this topic seriously and understand that gender equality is not a woman's issue, it's an issue for everyone. And when it comes to what men can do, really, I mean, it doesn't really need to be that big. Yeah. So they can simply just, embrace curiosity and get informed of gender issues as a first step, offer support, be vocal, and just share appreciation. And I guess I will holistically call that just being an ally. So I mean, I can give you one of my own personal recent personal examples. So my office mate, a couple of months ago, she came back from maternity leave, and then we were discussing like her teleworking arrangements, that she was going to take the afternoons off. And during that discussion, one of the things I told her was that for the coming months, coming back to work, your visibility is going to be important. And at that time, she didn't actually respond very well to what I was telling her, and that's fine. But it was one day when a male colleague said that, oh, I wanted to actually have a meeting with you, but you weren't here, that it clicked, what I was saying. Because it's not that she wasn't working, it's that she wasn't physically in the office. And when it comes to that, it's like, if you want to have a meeting with someone, you can also do this via Microsoft Teams, for example. I have Teams meetings with people who are maybe 10 footsteps away from me. And that's something that, it really got to her finally, and it's something I kind of had to continue to reinforce. So another thing she would do is that when she would be leaving the office, she would just kind of announce to everyone, okay, I'm off for the day, I'll see you tomorrow. And then, being the annoying person I am, I would correct her and say, no, I'll see you online. And then she would be like, okay. But then I would, do it again and again until she got it. And then she was like, yes, I am leaving, but I am available online if you need me. And, so then she started understanding, and then, she realized that she didn't appreciate what I was doing at first. But then, from my background as an employee relations officer, I explained to her how easy and subtly women can end up getting excluded from the workplace, especially when they come back from, maternity leave or long-term sickness, these sorts of extended absences where you miss out on, whatever is going on at work, and you have to catch up, and then, people might be like, oh, we just had a quick meeting about it, but, we'll fill you in later when you're back in the office tomorrow morning, Like these sorts of things that can really subtly just happen, and trying to be a male ally just recognizing that from my own experience. I would basically, if someone came by her office and said, "Oh, where's Veronica?" I would say, "Have you tried reaching her online?" Or just like these little things where people don't think about it, but they make a difference. Or when someone would call her phone, and I would say, I would just message her in Teams, "Hey, I saw this person call your phone. Maybe you want to reach out to them." And it's just those little things that you can do just to support your colleagues, because that's kind of what it is about. And there's no reason, at least for me, that a female colleague should be excluded because of her childcare responsibilities.
And I think you touched upon also a very kind of important but challenging issue, is that this visibility, this culture of being present versus then a work-life balance. And it doesn't only concern women. I mean, I think it's even harder for men. If a man would say, "I'm going to go home now and take care of my child," I know that in some organizational cultures that can be perceived as a career killer. It's this, being present, being visible, and how that impacts your career. So also kind of a challenge, but also another topic for a longer discussion. But let me move now to Christine, back to the WPS agenda. And because you mentioned also, you gave us some statistics about the low number of women in peace negotiations. And in your opinion, what does meaningful participation of women in peace negotiations really look like? Meaningful participation, not just presence, but in terms of actual power and in impact, as we were discussing.
Thank you, Vera. That's, I think, one of the biggest questions, and I see colleagues here who have dedicated decades to this question, how to make participation of women meaningful. This is still one of the shortcomings of the implementation, because I think it was already mentioned by Jeremy, it's not only numbers, it's about the real impact. And I think those terms already were said today. Well, it's more than just being present. Personally, I think it's also taking the lead, bringing up topics that are important to you, to your community, to the group you represent. This requires a set of skills. You need to be able to make an argument. You need to be able to support your argument in a very strong way. For example, the needs of women are not understood by other groups of the population. Maybe they are not even aware of it. So it needs skills to explain it, and to explain it with determination. And I think, it was already mentioned, and I put it down here, this requires adequate training. People need to be prepared for negotiations. People need to be prepared. They should have experts with them. There should be advice given to them how to be led through this negotiation. The second thing, it's more about the content. Very often, soft topics or social topics are parked with women. I don't think that this is correct. We are able to talk about technical issues too. And when we talk about ceasefires, when we talk about armistice, when we talk about peace agreements, this includes demobilization, disarmament, reintegration of ex-combatants, how checkpoints are, for example, set up in practice. What does it mean for the security situation of children, women, elderly, and so on and so forth? This is what needs to be discussed by women too. We cannot just talk about the soft topics, the dialogue, the reconciliation. No, we need to shape how security forces or law enforcement is deployed in our region and how they are taking care of our community. And as a last point, I put down here, women should have a transformative effect on societies. After a war or a crisis, a society needs healing and needs to be rebuilt. But we don't want to rebuild the same society that we had before. It needs to be stronger, it needs to be more resilient, And it needs to be more inclusive, because only if we manage to build more resilient communities, we can withstand the next crisis, the next war. We will be able to settle disputes on a local level, on a low level, before it starts being elevated to a bigger issue. So state rebuilding and the post-conflict reconstruction requires a very strong gender lens. And this is not only on paper, it also needs budgeting. The budget needs to be allocated in a way that also women are reflected in it. And this is the only way, this is what I'm certain of, this is the only way how we can avoid reproducing the patriarchal structures and discrimination in a society. And just yesterday, I had the pleasure to listen to an Iranian author, Nada Ebrahimi. She had a speech, a motivational speech, and she said something about being heard. And I think it was mentioned here before that we need to learn how to talk about things, how we present things. And she made an anecdote in her speech saying that she was told by one of her coaches that if you think that you are exaggerating, then you are just right. So I think we just should exaggerate a little bit more with our issues to be heard.
I heard that speech. I was there yesterday too. And another message, women, we need to be loud.
Exactly.
We need to really amplify our voices.
Exactly.
Lauter Frauen.
Lauter Frauen.
As that.
Exactly.
Great. So last question then to you, Marian. Kind of building on this this theme of transformation and what our policies having a transformative effect. How do we ensure that migration governance is not only gender sensitive, but also gender transformative? If we're talking about policies that really can have an impact and transform.
Yeah, thanks. And I think what I might be saying is building very much on what the others have already said at the panel, so I think it's quite complementary. At IOM, we actually advocate for gender responsive governance. What do we mean by that? Migration policy is gender responsive when it responds to the specific needs of all migrants, when it addresses structural causes of gender discrimination in migration, and when it transforms systems, norms, policies, and structures. So slightly different terminology, but I think same intent behind. And I think that's important. And looking at women and the fact that 304 million international migrants exist at the moment, according to statistics, and 51% of them are women and girls. I think it's really important to consider that as well. So the principles of the gender responsive approach are enshrined in our gender equality policy. And I'm actually very fortunate because I work in an organization that for the first time has a female director general and 2 female deputy director generals. And in the leadership team of 6, there's an additional woman and only 2 men. I don't mean that against men, but sort of in terms of sort of who actually has the power. I think we're undergoing quite a transformation in IOM as well, because we're going from data to actual power shifts, and a very strong emphasis of the new administration on these kind of elements. So it's very interesting times there. But on the gender responsive governance, a few thoughts. A key policy change needed would be to establish gender responsiveness as a regular part of migration strategies of member states. So some countries do this, they incorporate gender perspectives in their migration policies, but more efforts are needed to align migration and gender equality frameworks at all government levels, so national, regional, local. And we just said that numbers aren't really that important, but they are, because they describe a picture. So sex disaggregated migration data is key. and there's not enough of it. It's not collected systematically on all countries, and if you don't count something, it doesn't count. So that's something really important. And then you break it down further. Only a few countries regularly collect and publish sex disaggregated migration data, and even fewer countries link that with labor market data. So essentially, I think that shows a little bit that there's a lot of work to do there, and that's a part of the migration strategies, to actually know the data and then extrapolate from that. Second point, make sure to include participation of gender experts in policy design and implementation. And in terms of measurement, use gender impact assessments to systematically evaluate different gendered impacts in migration policies. So I'm not answering with one specific policy response. It needs a whole set of different policy changes, a systematic and dedicated type of action. And if I can then circle back, though, to one policy change, IOM promotes safe, orderly and regular migration. And if we manage to sort of evolve into a world where a lot of more member states see the value of migration, the demographic needs that we have and the pressures and the fact that migrants contribute, if we provide more safe legal pathways, this will benefit all migrants and will prevent the people, and in particular also migrant women and girls and boys, end up in situations of vulnerabilities along migration routes. So that would be one very specific wish that I would have.
Thank you so much. And also going back to what you said at the beginning about the need to change the narratives around migration.
And around women.
Yes, so that, and that women are not a homogeneous group, not just when we talk about migration, but when we talk about gender equality in all sectors too. We are all diverse, as they say, women in all their diversity. So good. Now we have about 10 minutes for your questions and comments to the panelists. I see a hand back there. Please, if you just stand up and you can introduce yourself. I think we have a microphone going around, or you can. So introduce yourself and...
Thank you very much. My name is Danielle Dahlstrom, and my background, I've been at CTBTO, at IAEA, largely in nuclear security in the nuclear sector. And one point that I want to raise, I think that we've all seen the policies, we've all seen, like Jeremy said, there are now more women in the room, and now what? And the challenge from my perspective and my lived experience is that we don't have a lived experience, a shared lived experience. And so I've been in many rooms, for example, or walked into meetings with a boss that said, "Don't be difficult today, Danielle." And that just meant, please don't question what we're doing or push back or whatever it may be. And I think we've all had moments where we've sort of had to do a double take in terms of what we're there to do and how we're perceived to be there, or why we're perceived to be there. And I saw a really interesting video about this where with men, just on a very lived experience level, there was a Dutch video that was done, and there were CEOs and business leaders there, and the women sat down and they were expecting to be interviewed about how important they are and how senior they are. And the woman said, "Thank you so much for coming today, and I love your shoes." And sort of looked, or she would say, "So how do you balance having children and being a leader?" And it was really interesting because afterwards they said to the men, and they were quite emotional, they said, "These are really insulting and difficult questions. I'm the technical, whatever it may be." And so I think from a cultural point of view, I've had many years at the IAEA, culturally it is difficult. You have different religions, you have different barriers to cultural understanding, but I think very much on a very granular level, the lived experience is different. I don't know if any of my male colleagues were told, "Don't be difficult today." I'm pretty sure not. And I think that what we see is that, especially in the international organizations, we have policies, we have numbers, we have gender parity, we have initiatives, we have men championing all these things. They still go back to their office and they're the boss. They still go back to the office and they're not asked, will you be... Why did you leave early today, or what are you wearing, or you don't smile much. And I think that the average man would be quite taken back by that, but that is something that I've heard and experienced. And I think so, maybe from a training point of view, I think when a man is in the position, just again on a lived experience level, to see or feel that in their actual central nervous system. You're there to run the meeting and you're asked where the coffee is. And so I think from a cultural point of view, the onus is on just women holding their course and banding together and doing all the things we're doing and having these panels and showing up for each other. But equally, I think that the disconnect always, why aren't the policies implemented? Because no one understands what they feel like. No one understands how they haven't experienced it. So yes, they can say it's important, or like Christine was saying, it shouldn't be a separate pillar, or we don't have the budget for that, because it's not their lived experience. So I don't know from a training point of view if it's just a matter of having sort of cultural exchanges with with some of our colleagues. Like, let me explain to you what a day in my life is. And you can advocate for me, and you can champion me, and you can put me as a speaker somewhere. But actually, at the end of the day, don't be difficult, Danielle, summed up my UN experience. And it was simply a matter of having a question or pushing back or not inappropriately, but asking a question of someone that they felt or at that particular time couldn't answer. And so I think it's a matter of men. All of us looking at this video, it's Dutch, it's phenomenal. I sent it to my son who's 17. But I do think from a lived experience level, the policies don't go anywhere until from a lived experience level, we know what it feels like. And I think the onus is on men to show up and experience that, and the onus is also on women to not be so hard on ourselves sometimes and lament the policies don't work because they don't work. But it's just staying the course and setting a good example for the next generation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. It was a reflection. I don't know if anybody wants to respond, but I mean, it's true. And I think when you were kind of talking about that, I thought about, hey, it would be kind of a nice experiment to go back to the office tomorrow, the women, and then tell our male colleagues, hey, I really like your shoes, or I mean, to try to flip that to see, how they would react to something, or ask, how do you manage, you have 2 kids, how do you balance your work-life balance, or ask those questions that we as women get. So maybe it's kind of an exercise.
Well, I can tell you that I did a big project in the financial services business, and it was about this topic, not about gender, but it was about leadership and people that were below middle management from underrepresented identity groups. And what we did was we created a reverse mentoring program so that the people from the underrepresented identity groups were the mentors, and the mentees were the executives, so that they could live a day in their life, but on a regular basis, because one day is not enough. And then they started to understand what it means to be, a hijabi who is working in banking and customer service, or what it means to be a trans person working in this business. And beyond that, beyond being able to identify what the challenges that those people had, they were also able to understand that there was a lot of talent there that they would have never recognized, because those are people that they simply would not talk to. So there are many ways to skin a cat, and that's just one of the ways that I've seen it work in action. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a former retired Austrian diplomat. My question goes to all of you. Action is mainly done on the political level to move the agenda forward. In Austria, I think the late Johanna Donal was one of these fighters who did probably more for empowerment of women and women's rights. Now, a question, since I served in Japan at the time, we now have a woman prime minister there. Her idol is Margaret Thatcher, so an Iron Lady. My question to you, do such, ladies, and I mean, we didn't have, in our foreign ministers, we had 4 of them. Now, at present, Beate Meinl-Reisinger. I don't think she considers herself an Iron Lady. I don't know how she manages to do that job and run the party and run the family with 3 children. I mean, my highest admiration. Personally, I think I'm more in favor of personalities like you had it, Eleanor Roosevelt. The important influence on a powerful man, the president. But my question would go, do we need such figures? I mean, Greta Thunberg for environmental matters. Do you think we need those personalities to move the agenda forward?
Yeah, good question. Let's maybe start with Christine. Do we need Iron Ladies?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I had this conversation already before, and I speak here in a personal capacity now, the opinion on that, and I think yes. We have male-associated traits in us, and men have female-associated traits in them. Men can be, let's say, soft or benevolent leaders, and Margaret Thatcher was one who stood her ground and went through. And she did a lot of reforms in a time when it was very turbulent. So I think, yes, I think women should not shy away just to be themselves and to adapt to the situation, and also to adapt to the situation that is needed. I mean, it's not always that we want to talk and discuss and discuss. Once we have talked about something, we need to put it in action. So, and there is one more reference. I think, I don't want to name any other ministers or so, but when we look globally, there are lots of ministers, prime ministers, presidents who have a lot of children. Are they ever asked how they manage their career and the children and the wife? So I really wonder whether this is still adequate to ask today. Because we do. Women manage with the help of their husbands, fathers, families, etc. We manage.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sharon.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand, just like there is not one character that men have, that women are cut from all different cloths. You have some women that are aggressive, you have some women that are collaborative, and you have everything in between. So the idea that we have to ask the question, do we need an iron lady? Well, why not, if that's her personality, right? I mean, we had Jacinta Ahern, who was a completely different kind of a leader, and she was equally impactful at a very turbulent time when we had the pandemic, right? I think that people have to be authentic to their character, to their values, and if that means that they are an iron lady, that's what they are, and if that means that they're a different kind of leader, that's what they are too. I mean, you certainly could not compare the temperament of, I don't know, Barack Obama to the temperament and leadership style of Donald Trump, right? But they're both leaders, and they both were elected 2 times, right? And so we get what we get, and you have to deal with it, right? And nobody questions whether or not Obama was soft. And, well, maybe we do question about Trump, but that's a different story, right?
Another topic. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe sort of also very much speaking in a personal capacity, but I think you always sort of, and I don't want to, I agree with what you said, I just want to add another nuance as well, and I would say it depends a little bit. Do we need an iron lady? We need women leaders as examples, definitely, that's out of question. But if you look at the history of the UK, and I think you might be able to hear where I'm from, and you sort of see that there was Margaret Thatcher, and then there was no other female leader anywhere in the UK for decades, then I would sort of question whether we need that kind of a female leader if we're actually talking about International Women's Day and women who support other women and promote women in whatever way that they do. Not saying that women don't have very many different characters, but I would have a few question marks, again, speaking in a very personal capacity.
Jeremy?
My mom was an iron lady, and I seem to attract iron ladies into my life. And it's what you guys were also saying. There are different personality traits for different people. What we need is women leadership in general. So there's different situations where different attributes are beneficial, where different attributes are more of a hindrance. But when you have a diversity of people who can use their strengths in different situations for a positive outcome, that's what we should want as a society. So the women that are iron leaders, maybe that's what their environment needs them to be, because we were talking about these political spheres that were male-dominated. Those men are not easy characters. I've worked with a few directors. The men and the women are not easy characters. So it's not necessarily something that is even gender related. It's what the position and the role requires you to be. And the people that are able to take on that leadership, power to them for having those character traits, and the ones that are more able to exude more soft power through more, let's say, diplomacy or just trying to find a common solution. That's also beneficial in other scenarios, because you can't always come like a battering ram and just have your way. I mean, we might be seeing that playing out on the international sphere a bit more these days, but you can also see what it's causing. Power to all the women and all different leadership styles. Use them all and every attribute you have to exert whatever kind of influence you have.
And important, be authentic.
Yes.
It's being authentic. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. You had your hand up, and then maybe we take 3 and 4. Okay. Why don't we ask the questions? We take 4 questions, and then I'll ask the panelists to respond. I think she was first.
I would like to follow up on this. This is not really a question, but I would like to go back to the question, because I think the point is not if we need the Iron Lady, but who needs the Iron Lady? And the answer is probably, why is it that Iron Ladies get there and other female leaders do not? So what is the price? And the answer is that they are less dangerous, they don't challenge the structure, which is also why probably, as Sharon Ehrlich was saying, some tough female leaders are not good to other women, because in many cases, if not most cases, the price that women have to pay to get there is acting as if they were men, or at least reproducing this kind of system. So, for example, you know, in a situation, so you have to be louder. What if the culture in the room would be such as if there is a person who is loud, then the other one would say, oh, that's not good for a leader to be that loud. You know, why should the women reproduce the same kind of leadership that men do to be recognized as leaders? So I think that the structure is the problem. So another example, like how to support women in an organization. Instead of telling them, so try to be as performative as the men, why not going to the men and say it loudly, oh, that's a great thing that you have taken paternal leave. And doing this for the men and for the women, because these allow the women and the men to enact other kinds of leadership and cultures. So I think that's actually the challenge, not just to have another woman who is loud and act as if it was a man.
Thank you. There was well, maybe since we're on this side of, we only have time for maybe 2, 3 more questions. So,
thank you so much. I think my question is somewhat relevant to the familiar faces I see in the room. I'm a student at the DA, and I'm interested in working for international organizations. And my question is about a variable which, as I understand, has not yet been covered, is the expertise, which usually associated with age. And as for early career female professional, are there any hints which you can give? Because as I see it, we may have even double task, not to be present, not to go for ourselves being present, and so therefore testifying that gender equality is not only in facts, but also like qualitative. And the second one is that by taking leadership role, we might change the systems and the leadership style we just talked about. So is that possible to holistically enter the system and keep going without mentally burning yourself out and maybe getting desperate at times when some shortcomings get in the way?
Thank you. There was another question. Miriam, in front? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for this inspiring evening. I'm also part of SAGE, and we do also have a gender plan at this school, and we're part of the people who make sure that this gets implemented. So my question is how to not focus on the numbers, how to get this implemented, and how to have those difficult conversations. If you guys have any advice or insights, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. And last question over here.
Yes, so it is also question/comment, and I think it's more of a generational thing, but I have the feeling that the previous generations, they had these very traditional, even in a couple, you had the very traditional division of roles, so the child care role would be predominantly with the mother, and therefore, obviously, that would impact her career, the possibility to be present at various social events, for example, after work, etc., etc. But I see now that with the new generation, this is fortunately changing a bit, and that the fathers are taking a much more active role in raising the children, therefore enabling also the women to partake in their careers and actually be present and visible and push forward. So I think that we definitely also need the Iron Ladies, and the Iron Ladies behind them also have Iron Men who support them in being that.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm going to ask the panelists maybe in the wrap-up, to address, I think we have two concrete questions. One is in the area of more generations, age, so challenges of young women entering international, not just, I don't think it just applies only to international organizations, but organizations as such, but maybe with a highlight on international organizations. Is there a disadvantage? I think sometimes for women, you're either too young, you're too old, you're about to have kids, it's a challenge. And then there was a concrete question on implementation. So how do you implement going beyond numbers? So maybe I will start, start with Marian to address some of those questions in a closing wrap-up.
Maybe on the sort of going beyond numbers thing, one of the things that our female leadership brought in when they started their term was something that we call a leadership compass, and specific leadership competencies that all the leaders in the organization are specifically trained on. And they include competence like humanity and empathy. And so that, for me, is something that is going to lead to a culture shift, both in terms of staff members know what to expect from their supervisors in terms of behavior that is not or is not acceptable. Diversity, equality, and inclusion is another one of those. And so that's how our female leaders are tackling this in the International Organization for Migration. And that goes beyond numbers. We're also tackling the numbers, and we're not very successful in some areas. But I think sort of looking at, what competencies do you need as a leader? How do you enforce those or reinforce those? How do you produce behaviors that in the long term will change the culture of an organization, I think are really important parts. And then on the advice, if you're a young woman entering the labor market, I was 120 years ago, and I started as an intern in different international organizations, and basically was fortunate that I found an entry there. But basically my advice is put yourself out there. Just do it, because women are fantastic, and nowadays you have other women who lead and who will support you.
Great, thank you. Jeremy.
Yeah, I guess first maybe I'll address about your group SAGE you mentioned. So when you don't want to focus on the numbers, well, I should say you shouldn't focus on numbers, you should focus on the impact. What do you want your group to achieve? Whether it's in the short term, the medium term, the long term. So, you know, for example, what do you want to change? You want to change the policy or you want to change the structure? You don't need 100 people to change a policy. From my legal background, it's better to have maybe 3 people to really focus on a policy, because you'll get all sorts of opinions, all sorts of references, and it will have too many cooks in the kitchen. So if you want to, you look at the key stakeholders you'll need, who has the technical expertise, and then you target what impact you want to have in that structure, in that policy, and as a coordinated group, you work on that. So like even for example, I have a working group on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. I didn't just randomly select people, I selected the key stakeholders within the organization who would be more exposed should there be a risk of that, because they would be the first ones I need to interact with, the first ones who would bring it to my attention, the first ones who, should something happen, would be at the forefront of any scandal for the organization. So those are the people I engage with, and those are the people that I am trying to make that structural reform to make sure that I create a safe environment for everyone in the organization and don't put that reputational risk for the CTBTO. When it comes to representation, then obviously numbers matter, because then that's going to visibility, that's going to showing, you know, in your outreach, and, you know, it's an easy way to kind of tick a box and say, look at all these women that we have that are coordinating, great job. But then again, it's where do you need the support? Because maybe in some instances, it might actually be better to be reaching out more to men to have those allies, because as we're trying to overcome power structures, then as it currently stands, in certain power structures, they're more male dominated. So then reaching out to a woman who's an engineer might be less helpful than we're reaching out to a man who's an engineer, because then they might introduce you to a wider network. But when you meet with the woman engineer, they might introduce you to a targeted network. So the network of women engineers in that field. And then you can leverage both professional networks. And then that comes to me transitioning into being a young professional. I struggled for 10 years to break into the international organizations. I did internship after internship. I went public-private sector to get more work experience so that I can be more competitive for even the junior positions. So it's not necessarily a gender issue, it's an issue with the system. You have to think about it this way. You're all students right now, so you're here at the Diplomatic Academy of Wien. Then you're studying international relations, some of you are doing human rights, some of you are doing law, but then that's only here. So when you look at your class and you look at those numbers of people, okay, that's my immediate competition if I want to apply to one of these UN-based organizations. But then you're forgetting that there's people who are also at many other institutions who are studying international law, politics, international relations, and they might all be just as equally qualified as you, if not more, but then you're competing for a small pool of jobs. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, we had an internship for our external relations, and they had like 500 applicants. So could you imagine, from an HR perspective, trying to sift through 500 people to find, and they're not just applying because they're maybe qualified, they're all very well qualified. So you have to pick someone, and you have to take into so many considerations, gender, geographical representation, all these factors. So yes, it's very tough. I'm not saying it's easy. I didn't have an easy part, but I made it, and I remember the people that helped me along the way. So one piece of advice would be to find a mentor, because it was my mentor at the International Criminal Court that got me into HR policy. And that actually motivated me to go back to school, and I quit my job in the private sector, and I went to law school and did my international European law, and then that opened up doors when I got into the OPCW in The Hague. And then being there, you know, I met someone who would be then my future director, who actually recently left. So even when I was applying at the CTBTO, I was someone they kind of knew from my past experiences. So when I joined, I had a colleague who remembered me as an intern at the International Criminal Court. He's in my in my department. So that's like so many years ago. So find a mentor, don't get discouraged by the challenges, and really build your network among your peers, and look for people who you aspire to be in those roles in the future.
Thank you so much. That's really good advice. Sharon.
Yeah. If there was one thing I wish I would have learned at the beginning of my career, that would be that careers are not built in isolation. You do not build your career alone. There are many people who will help you along the way. It's important to understand that there's a very big difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Women are over-mentored. And why is that? Because everyone likes to tell us what to do, right? And a sponsor is different, because the sponsor is the one who is going to advocate for you when you're not in the room. But having a sponsor is challenging, because that's someone who's putting their reputation on the line for you, which means we go back to what I said earlier, that they need to know, like, and trust you, right? So if there was one piece of advice I could give you, that would be to cultivate your mentoring relationships, target who would be valuable sponsors for you, and start to cultivate those relationships as well. And you can start very small. You can start following them on LinkedIn, making intelligent comments when they post, showing up at events where they're at, and being visible, in any way that you can be, because you can make it alone if you're one of those iron ladies, but it's tough. You need a community. Communities build careers. Vera will tell you that. You had mentors, you had sponsors, I've had them. I'm sure the others on the panel have had them as well. That would be something I would really encourage you to focus on, is building relationships, and lots of them.
Great.
I'll leave the other question out.
Further great advice.
Yeah.
Finally, Christine, your thoughts on the questions, or any final thoughts?
Well, I think I would just end up with, or finalize with something that a female supervisor once told me when I was at the beginning of my career. She said, "Don't hesitate, take it, they will only ask you once."
Yeah, that's true.
If you don't take it, the opportunity is gone.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for participating, especially thank you, Marian, thank you, Jeremy, Sharon, and Christine. This has been truly an inspiring conversation, and we can continue, because now it gives me great pleasure to invite everyone next door for networking and drinks and some refreshments, so we can continue the conversation. And please network, talk, and thank you all for participating, and wishing everyone a lovely evening.